Hi again, folks. As I said, my name is Tyler Colburn. I am the professional development consultant here with the Nova Scotia College of Social Workers. Just want to let folks know, before we get started, I have disabled your access to your camera and your microphone for right now. But before we get into small group discussions, that will be enabled again. Again, this is being recorded, so it can be viewable at a later date for other folks who can't be here today. We do have about 140 people registered, so I'm expecting that we should have 50 or 60, maybe 70, 80 people here today. But it's also December 1st, and welcome to that period of season where you get to say, that can wait till January. So maybe some folks are waiting till January. But yeah, you're here for the new Code of Ethics and Standards of Practice. This is the digital portion of our roadshow. Prior to this, we did sessions in Sydney, in Unama'ki, Cape Breton, in Antigonish. We did one in New Minas, one in Yarmouth, and we did one a couple weeks ago here in the city in Chipuktuk. And this is the digital online version. So thanks for joining. I know some folks are joining here in the province. Some folks are joining from outside of Nova Scotia. I know at least one person's joining from Mexico, which is pretty cool. Oh, thanks, Jay. I will watch my email as we get going through this. I just see that some people are having trouble logging in. Eventbrite can be a bit funny at times. Before we get started, though, I am going to begin with a land acknowledgement. I want to begin by acknowledging that we are presenting from Chibuktuk. Alec is in the office over on Brunswick Street, which is Guwagayach, which is colonially known as Citadel Hill, but in Mi'kmaq is Big Pine Hill. I'm calling from Punamukutijik, which is the Mi'kmaq name for Dartmouth, an area here in Chibuktuk. And so both areas are located on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. The inherent rights of the Mi'kmaq were recognized in the Peace and Friendship Treaty signed with the Mi'kmaq, Maliseet, and Passamaquoddy peoples from 1725 to 1779. This series of treaties did not surrender Indigenous land, resources, or sovereignty to the British Empire, but instead established rules for an ongoing relationship between nations. Canada later reaffirmed the treaties in Section 35 of the Constitution Act of 1982, and they remain active to this day. And would love to hear from folks in the chat. We're going to do a check-in more fulsomely in small groups, but I'd love to see in the chat, how are you arriving? If you can name the land that you're on, that'd be really amazing. So you can go to placenames.mapdev.ca. And also I'd love to know, what are you curious about today? And before I go any further, I'm going to post some things in the chat here, and you're going to need these throughout the presentation. So I'm going to post in the public link to this presentation, which you should follow along on your own as well. When you're in small groups today, there's going to be prompts and suggestions for conversations. So you'll be wanting to use that link to this presentation. And there's also a link to our Code of Ethics and Standards of Practice. So watch for that in the chat. If you need it again, I can post it again. So as we begin land acknowledgement, it can also be helpful for many settlers like myself. I'm a person of Irish ancestry predominantly, so I'm a settler to these lands. And for many people, we can get disconnected from the understanding that we're also expressions of nature. We are a part of nature. Through white supremacy, capitalism, settler colonialism, we can often hear and feel and believe that we're here to dominate the land and the nature. And so if we flip that and reverse it to try and see ways that we are also nature, it can be helpful in our journey towards decolonization. This quote from Gesturing Towards Decolonial Futures on the bottom says, "Understand that the earth is not an extension of our bodies, it's the other way around." So as we think about the code of ethics, ethical practice, standards of practice, it's important for us also to strive for decolonization. There's a commitment to this in our code of ethics and standards of practice at the beginning of the document, and it's further defined throughout each of the values and also in the value 4 of truth and reconciliation. So if you can, hold on to this awareness that you are also nature as we're having this discussion today. And as we acknowledge the land, you're invited to pause in gratitude for all who have and continue to heroically care and advocate for this beautiful land. May we join them in the sacred work. And so I'm thinking of this weekend a lot, actually, about folks at Fairy Creek out in BC who are engaged in quite a bit of resistance in old growth forests, thinking about land defenders and water protectors, across Mi'kmaq, so thinking Hunter's Mountain and Unama'ki, Cape Breton, thinking as well about folks in Wet'suwet'en out in BC. So there's people engaged in Indigenous resistance and resurgence all throughout Mi'kmaq, Turtle Island, and around the world. And let's pause in gratitude for them and join them in this work. We can also ground ourselves in the wisdom of the land-based Mi'kmaq teachings and values we must all begin to learn. We can work to decolonize ourselves, our practice, and this community that we share by working for justice for all living beings as an expression of our gratitude for being here. We can recenter ourselves away from the violent ways colonization fills our world and fills us. And that one in particular, as we're thinking about ethical practice, I think it's important that we also think about the ways that, again, settler colonialism, white supremacy, capitalism, neoliberalism reinforce violence in practice, reinforce violence in our systems and our ideologies. I invite you to let go of the unconscious bias that is everywhere inside and out and know that it is an ongoing practice. And hopefully, this session can help us better understand and address um, the ways settler colonialism and white supremacy has shaped our understandings of normative ethics and how we as social workers can and must strive for better. Hi, folks. See you checking in. Thank you so much in the chat. Reminder as well, we're all treaty people. And so, as a settler who's a social worker and working for the regulatory college, I'm often reflecting on what are my accountabilities to treaty rights and treaty relationships as a social worker and as a settler. So, as we think about treaties, how does this impact what we do and how we do it? And how will it guide our work together today and going forward? And of course, for us, as we think about the standards of practice and the code of ethics and the values and guiding principles, we're really drawing or striving for not just learning, but unlearning. So we know that many of the conditions of today that lead to oppression, marginalization, harm against people, need to be deconstructed and unpacked. And so just as much as we're here to learn, we're also here to unlearn. Separate and distinct from our commitment to decolonization and our land acknowledgement is a reparations for people of African descent. And I'm thinking specifically about the historic African Nova Scotian communities, the 52 of them across this province. And for us, we understand that reparations is more than just something that we talk about. It's more than just, a moral obligation. It's a material obligation. So it's shifting resources, assets, programs, which to counter the human rights violations and crimes committed against people of African descent. For us, that looks like five things: restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, satisfaction, and then guarantees of non-repetition. And in these sessions, I often say, if you're not familiar with reparations or it's a concept that maybe you're more new to, take a time to look at our code of ethics and standards of practice and the piece around reparations. And as social workers, I call on you folks to find ways that you can integrate this not only into your practice, but in the agencies and institutions and relationships that you have. Same with our commitment to decolonization. It's on us to not just hold these values and principles at work, but also to bring them home. And as we're thinking about reparations, we're thinking about people who, again, from those distinct 52 communities across Nova Scotia who are African Nova Scotian, and thinking about people who have ancestry with the Black Loyalists, the Maroons, the Southern American Black refugees, and how these communities and the legacies of these communities have shaped not just Nova Scotia's cultural landscape, but also the political and economic landscape as well. And so as we think about decolonization and reparations and the code of ethics and standards of practice, I'm really thinking about this quote from Ubuntu-centered practice. And they write, unless you're practicing with cultural humility, employing anti-oppressive practices, and decolonizing your approach as a mental health professional or healthcare provider, like social workers, you are likely perpetuating anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism. The systems we work within inherently uphold white supremacy, and at their core, they are anti-Black and anti-Indigenous. Therefore, cultural humility isn't an optional cultural competency skill, it's an ethical and civic responsibility. So as we think about this, we're thinking about, the guiding principles and the values and the standards of practice that are rooted in cultural responsiveness. And the Code of Ethics does a great job, I think, of broadening the scope of social work practice to take a more of an active stance, less of a neutral stance, because we have to be resisting oppression and making sure that we're taking an anti-racist stance. So today, we are going to be spending some time getting to know each other here shortly in a few minutes. So you'll be in small groups. You'll be in the small groups for the same session or for this throughout the session. You'll be in the same small groups. I must not have had enough coffee this morning. But if your groups change throughout the day, that's okay. We can put people in other groups, but will mostly be with the same folks throughout the session. We're going to switch over to having Alex speak for most of the session, and he's going to run us through an overview and grounding of the Code of Ethics and Standards of Practice. So what are like the theoretical underpinnings? What does this mean for social work practice? We'll have lots of breaks throughout the day. And then we're going to be thinking a little bit, how do we apply these Code of Ethics and Standards of Practice? And we're going to be looking towards a couple of tools that the college has co-created with other organizations, and how we can, again, take an active stance to challenge systems of power and oppression in our work and our practice as social workers. We'll do a checkout and we'll talk about next steps. So for us, we really are hoping that you develop and shift some knowledge, values, and skills related to code of ethics and challenging normative ethics and understanding how we can apply these in practice. But as well, we have, how many people we have on the call right now? 70 people, hoping that you build some relationships with folks maybe you don't know, or deepen relationships with people that you do know in your small groups. It is also renewal season, which is bananas. So you have until January 31st to finish your renewals. And of course, this session counts for your social work ethics. If you've already completed your social work ethics for the year, you can track this under formal professional development. This session will probably take us a full 4 hours. If you need any help with your renewals or your tracking and submitting the PD, reach out to me, but also check out our website, nscsw.org/PD. There is a video on YouTube as well that can help you in your renewals when you're submitting and tracking your PD. So, some framing for our time together. Um, this is offered from the Broccoli Seed Agreements from Gesturing Towards Decolonial Futures, and this is an adaptation, but want to offer that your engagement with this session may not have immediate and or practical applications for you, and that's okay. Meaning that oftentimes we come to sessions like this or engagements like this and think, I'm going to get exactly what I want from the session, or I'm going to learn everything in these 4 hours. For some of us, it might take us more time to process and engage with reflective and reflexive practice. And maybe this won't line up with your expectations. And so just want to invite a sense of curiosity. You don't have to agree with anything presented or shared, but we ask that you be open to seeing what happens. Of course, as social workers, you all have to agree to the code of ethics and standards of practice to keep your engagement or your registration up with the college. But when you're in small group discussions, what those code of ethics look like in practice could be different for each of you. We're all different people. We're all different social workers. We work in different contexts and agencies. We have different lived experiences and worldviews and identities. So just a reminder that we're carrying all of that with us into the session. You take responsibility for yourself by observing and learning from your conscious and unconscious responses. We shouldn't be getting into anything too intense for discussions today, but just a reminder, as complex humans, our body and our minds do things. We feel things. We experience things differently. So just invite you to take care of yourselves. It's up to you to decide how much you want to share and participate. It is a very rainy, gross morning here in Punamukutichik, and I think across most of Mi'kma'ki. And so you might be feeling a little less energy, maybe a bit more passive. That's okay. Do encourage you in the small groups, though, to be, engaging as much as you can, at least in the chat if possible. And again, I will enable your cameras and your microphones here in a few minutes. And then finally, we can all engage in ways that support others, meaning, this isn't a space for healing or therapeutic support, but how we relate to each other, how we communicate with each other, how we engage with each other matters. And so just encourage you to show up in your best selves if you can. We're going to be going into some small groups here in a minute, probably about groups of 4 or 5 people per room. And if you haven't been using Zoom recently, this is kind of what it's going to look like when you get an invite to go to your small group. You'll see some sort of pop-up that's going to invite you to a breakout room. If that doesn't work for you or you're having trouble connecting to your breakout room, you can send myself or Alec a private message or a message in the chat and we'll place you into a room. If throughout the day this group gets smaller and your small group gets smaller, say it's only 1 or 2 of you, you can stay in that pair of 2 people, or you can ask us to put you into another room. We might check in with you as well if that happens. But in a few moments, you will get a notification that says to join a breakout room. I'm going to repost the links in the chat as well. So a reminder for folks who just joined, you're going to want to use the public link to this presentation. And you're also going to want to have the code of ethics open because we're going to be referencing them a lot throughout the session. And the public link to the presentation will have the prompts for the small group discussions. So for the first small group discussion, it's really a chance to just check in and build relationships. So you're going to be with, again, 4 to 5 people in a small room. And I want you to discuss what is on your heart, mind, and or spirit as we begin this session. It's a Monday morning, it's dreary. Share whatever feels right for you. Maybe something happened on this weekend that you're really excited about, or perhaps you're carrying some energy towards the holidays. Whatever you want to share is up to you. Then you're going to be moving into what are ethics and what is ethical practice. So what does that mean for you as an individual who's joining this call today? And then finally, how do we know we are practicing ethically? For folks who are reviewing this on YouTube at a later date, you can pause the video here and take some time to journal or think about those second two prompts. What are ethics? What is ethical practice? And how do we know we are practicing ethically? When we get back from the smaller groups, I'm going to invite 3 or 4 folks just to share what came up in your discussions.
Thanks, Tyler, for getting us set up for a good day and morning. We will likely go right till 1, just so folks know. I always appreciate Tyler setting the intention for the day, getting us geared up uh, to learning and to growth and to reflection. And I am looking forward to the conversation with all of you today as well. Can someone give me a thumbs up that I shared and you can see the presentation? Thank you,
We're good here.
Tyler. Excellent. Um, so I'm gonna probably talk at you for about 40 minutes just to get set up for some of the core changes in the code of ethics, how they were developed, what to look out for. And then after that, we'll take a break. And for the rest of the time, we will be breaking into small groups with some activities to start to apply different lenses and layers to the application of the code of ethics. So if you want to just bear with me for the moment, make sure your coffee is fresh and hot, and I'm going to just go over some of the context of this code of ethics and how we landed here. I think it's important to start with the fact that the last time our code of ethics was updated was 2004. So 21 years. 21 years is a heck of a long time to not update a code of ethics or standards of practice. Now, there have been updates to the standards of practice throughout that time, but a lot has changed in the world since then. And what the code of ethics and standards of practice are meant to do is to really catch our core documents up to where our practice is and to align with the core challenges that we know we are facing in practice in society, and to align social work with its primary goal and mission, which is to support justice and equity and to support folks in their journey towards greater well being. It's important to remember our roots as social workers in that we were created as a profession that responded to the worst aspects of the industrial revolution, in which, again, we saw a major shift in society that was predominantly agrarian. Lots of folks living out in rural areas. And as we started to embrace capitalism, the industrial complex, manufacturing, all of these things, we started to see a great flow of folks into the cities and into these areas where there was lots of concentration of poverty, of just people, and not a lot of social, and not really any social infrastructure. We didn't have labor laws. We didn't have a social safety net other than what the churches and charities were providing. And in that, social work was really created as a response to dull the worst aspects of that industrial shift, so as to not spark broader revolution that we were also seeing in the time. If we think about particularly the Russian Revolution, other ones across the states that started to overthrow capitalist systems towards towards socialist, centrally controlled markets, social work was responded to make sure that the worst aspects of the capitalism and the industrial complex were dulled, so that we didn't have a broader revolution towards bigger systemic change. It's important that we always carry that with us in terms of where we came from and what our goals, what our goals might have been, but what we were there to respond to. There is no doubt that Canada is a colonial state. That for much of that history, social workers have been around to work on state control through assimilation and the expense of community-based and Indigenous care practices. That evolution and that history has come from a number of competing places and a number of ideological tensions. If you think back to the early roots of social work in Canada, the US, and England in particular, great debates on what our role ought to be. You can think of Jane Addams and the settlement movement, in which, again, the role of social work was debated to be that wholesale change, working on those structural policies. And we know that Jane Addams was successful in terms of bringing in some state legislation to be able to build the safety net, as well as the suffragette movement to ensure that women's rights and voting rights were upheld, and those bigger structural changes. At the same point in time, you had Mary Richmond, who was bringing forward the first textbook on case management, working with individuals within the systems to make sure that they had their needs met. All of that to say is that social work has often gone through that debate and has been shaped and shifted by the broader pieces of society, our economy, our social, and our political, and that it's important that we hold on to that as we contextualize current social work practice. Again, while that process of social work was emerging, and colonization, anti-Black racism took hold across Canada. We also really started to erase some of the deeper healing traditions of the Mi'kmaq, African Nova Scotian, and Acadian communities that, of course, predate contemporary social work practice, and that those healing practices, rich in tradition, were not primary to social work practice or within our society, and that has a legacy of harm. We have to acknowledge, of course, that social work has been a part of the genocide of Indigenous people. And has continued to uphold anti-Black racism within our systems and our structures. It is on us as we lean into this new code of ethics to recognize that social work is evolving. It has explored, continues to do the work around its roots, around its focus, around its mission. This code of ethics is very much focused on justice and equity, and really actions, and it makes clear that we need to be advocating for systemic reform to build a more inclusive society. So the structure of this code of ethics also looks quite a bit different from the old model, where we had a standalone code of ethics and then a standard of practice as a separate document. Those were meant to be connected values and theories and standards that came out. With this new code of ethics, you'll note that they are all connected. Stemming from the 7 core values, which we'll look at in more detail. And then under each core value, a defining principle or a guiding principle, which defines the parameters for ethical behavior, as well as a context for practice, which is meant to ground where that application of that value or that ethical behavior might take hold or might be applied. And then standards of practice that flow underneath each of those, which set the minimal expectation for professional behaviors, and act as a roadmap and some guidelines in terms of how we negotiate ethical tensions. And I really think it's important that we note right at the beginning, because it'll come up throughout this training this morning, is that ethical tensions we face regularly, daily, all the time. And oftentimes, if you're facing an ethical tension, it's because there's no clear answer or no clear positive step forward. And so, as some of the conversation alluded to this morning, it's often about finding the least worst option, or the option that will do the least harm, knowing that the options in front of us may not be the best in terms of where our systems are or the opportunities that exist. And so it's a constant negotiation and a constant tension that we face. And it's on social workers, again, to act in good faith, make sound judgment, and engage in that deep self-reflection to navigate these ethical dilemmas and tensions, to try and prevent doing more harm, and again, trying to find the least worst option in systems and structures that we know aren't meeting human needs at this point in time. So, in terms of how we develop this, there is, if you go back in our catalog on our YouTube, there are a couple sessions that go into more detail in terms of how this code of ethics was created. So I'm just going to go over high level at this point in time so you get a sense of the extensive national work that occurred, and then the work that happened here in the province. So the code of ethics and standards of practice did begin from a national focus in 2019. At that point in time, the Canadian Association of Social Workers started by started this process with an apology. Uh, the apology was a significant one in that it apologized for social work's role in the genocide of Indigenous people and committed to reconciliation in decolonization by embedding the core principles of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission into our foundational document, which is the Code of Ethics. From that work, major consultations started to happen across the province, across the country, with various provincial groups, voices, consultations, feedbacks. Of course, the work was stopped and we had to figure out how to move forward within the pandemic, but then picked up again and continued and completed. And the national frame was approved in June of 2023. Shortly after that was approved, our province started to go to work to talk about how we could adopt that to the Nova Scotia context and framework. Well, again, we set up some focus groups. We worked with our decolonization committee, as well as our partners at the Association of Black Social Workers. I did consultations with social workers through surveys, focus groups, as well as had some targeted focus groups for structurally marginalized communities. And we came up with some core changes in terms of the National Code of Ethics to what we're seeing here in our version. One is we did add more to the Truth and Reconciliation section, really with a focus on decolonization and Indigenous rights here in Nova Scotia. We really needed to make sure that addressing anti-Black racism and reparations became central to our code of ethics. There are provisions in the new standards related to both of those, anti-Black racism, reparations, as well as environmental racism and intersectional identities, and how that how we are deeply reflecting on our own biases, on commitment to unlearning. And what the new Code of Ethics really frames for us is that to be a competent social worker, you must be a culturally responsive social worker. And so Section 7 emphasizes that more, but it is throughout the document as well. We also update just provisions and standards around electronic records to make sure those are up to standard. We also start to shift the language in this new code of ethics from self-care, which is individualistic, really not meeting the need in terms of the moral distress that social workers are facing on a regular basis. And oftentimes, how we talk about self-care um, is detrimental to both our overall preservation and resiliency that we need within the profession to continue to sustain ourselves to do this work. And we start to shift the language towards community care, recognizing that in order for us to remain resilient, in order us to be our best selves, that we need to be actively contributing to community change, to community care, and that we in fact receive that care and resiliency back when we're actively involved in it. And we also really updated and strengthened language around expectations of social workers to be trauma informed and to be engaged in trauma informed practice. So I want to talk a little bit about why this shift was important and some of the theoretical underpinnings as to where we landed. So if we look at, again, our ethical evolutions, and as I mentioned, our ethical framework is most often really created and put in context by our economic, social, and political functions that are happening around us. So when we look at, again, humanity and its evolution, starting way back, in medieval times where there was really not a lot of literacy, truth was really created through and by the church and those who held power within it to determine what was right or wrong, or how someone should act. As we started to move through the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, scientific discovery, of course, took hold, and we started to use the scientific method to determine both truth and ethics, what was morally right and wrong, and how that was conveyed. At the same point in time, that was a very top-down process where few people held that knowledge, held those answers, and it was very both consumeristic and paternalistic. As we move through into more modern times, again, and we started to feel the structures of both capitalism, patriarchy, and others take force in the modern era, we often started to look at ethical dilemmas and ethical tensions and a version of truth from who held power in a community or in a family. Again, very top down, very paternalistic, and often, again, as we move through our profession, as it started to evolve, was shaped by this discourse. And we created an ethical model where there was an inherent power imbalance, where, again, the professional client relationship perpetuated systemic harm by ignoring cultural, historic factors. As we started to move through modernity into the postmodern age, we started to recognize a different approach to ethics, one that was more rooted in a relational framework and a co-creation of meaning and understanding. And we started to work on trying to share that power. Again, the relationship itself, as we move through into the postmodern relational ethics era, becomes really essential to how we understand our ethical dilemmas, our ethical obligations, and our connection back to the folks that we serve. Ethics are co-created in this era and where we've landed through dialogue and a mutual understanding and a context of connection. Again, in this context of relational ethics, which we'll explore a little bit more, cultural responsiveness, self-reflection, and responsiveness are all key to how we come together with a service user, client, patient to be able to understand what's bringing them into this helping relationship, understand the tensions that they might be facing in their life, and then working together to build an understanding and build a plan moving forward in solidarity together. It's no longer I'm an expert, I'm going to tell you what to do. As we mentioned in some of this preamble, it becomes you're an expert of your life. I've got some skills and some knowledge that may support that. I, as a social worker, have biases. I have my own journey, my own beliefs. That's been shaped and informed by my experience, as does your service user, who has been shaped by their journey, by their lived experience, and together through a relational ethics lens, the dialogue that happens is meant to unpack and build meaning from those different journeys to come together to create a pathway forward in which that care becomes more mutual in that it becomes two-way. We're working together towards resolving some core issues in the service user's life. This evolution is intended to allow us to directly confront, of course, the profession's role in historical injustices by prioritizing relationality and context to address, again, colonialism, moving beyond just the Eurocentric models of care to honor Indigenous worldviews and healing practices. It's meant to actively dismantle anti-Black racism by centering the experiences of people of African descent, promoting reparative justice. And it recognizes that ethical practice requires challenging oppressive systems to create pathways towards equity, inclusion, and of course, the first value within our code of ethics, dignity of all people, to ensure that everyone is feeling respected, that they have the inherent dignity and worth that they deserve, and that their voices and stories and traditions are honored in the healing and caring process. So again, just to ground us a little bit more in what these changes, where these changes are coming from, is to recognize that the social work ethical lens was quite narrow which we'll talk about, and there was a need to expand it because of the complexity of our systems, because of the history of our profession, and of course of the major structural barriers that exist for many of our service users when trying to receive care. So Melinda Weinberg, a former professor at Dalhousie University who studied ethics, has written many articles about social work practice and ethical practice, and really recognized and started to write about that the traditional focus on the one-to-one relationship between the social work and service user was problematic in that it provided a narrow framework for actually resolving some of those tensions and didn't bring in an understanding of of what was creating those tensions. So again, what is promoted here is a more politicized understanding of ethics, small p political, of ethics that introduce structural and systemic factors. So, for instance, social workers often face ethical dilemmas due to structural barriers like insufficient resources, institutional policies, high workloads, and the inability to really connect because of those structural barriers that exist. These tensions arise from the gap between what the social workers want to do ethically and what they can realistically achieve. Again, the broadening of the framework allows us to bring in both of those considerations in terms of where the ethical obligations are, where the structural barriers exist, and where the social work operates within that. Merlinda talks a lot about embracing paradoxes, recognizing that there is a deep uneasiness in the work that we do and a disconnect often between the values that we hold and the work that we're being asked to do. Social workers operate within these paradoxical roles, balancing their commitment to service users within their obligations to institutional systems. Again, child welfare is a great example of this, where, again, it is the social worker's obligation to make sure that child rights are upheld and that families and children are moving towards greater well being. And in some contexts, that may mean removing a child from their parents, which creates an ethical conflict always. There's never not one when that action is being taken. And a lot of that has to do with pathways to child and family well-being. The president of the college right now is Robert Wright. Robert has a long history in child welfare, as well as working with the African Nova Scotian community. And one of the comments that he consistently makes is that where we see a lack of pathways to child and family well-being, we see an overabundance of policing infrastructure, surveillance, and systems that often harm. And so within the context of this paradox, we know that there aren't enough pathways, income, housing, food security, that lead to child and family well-being. Enter the social worker, oftentimes to deal with the consequences of those structural failures. And that, of course, creates consistent and constant tension for folks between the values of the profession, what their institutional obligations are, and how we negotiate those tensions. What we can also look at, and I mentioned this a little bit already, is that the professionalization of social work has always been a tension between our core mission, the institutions that we shape, and the dominant structural narratives of the day. For instance, throughout the 20th century, particularly as social work was evolving, as it was starting to find itself in more medicalized systems, its role in mental health and addictions, again, the issue started to shift for social work from addressing systemic issues like poverty, more individual casework, heavily influenced by psychoanalytic theories. Oftentimes, social workers were educated in the ethics of Freud and the complexities within that psychoanalytical framework. And of course, we know that those are harmful paradigms that really disempower the folks that we serve and negate the broader structural issues that are impacting overall well-being for folks that we serve. Of course, that shift narrowed the scope of ethics, sidelining the broader societal concerns. Again, within the need for shifting towards a broader interpretation of ethics and ethics that are rooted in a more politicized approach, individual accountability and risk for society, of course, came up there. The emphasis on individual accountability often overlooks the impact of structural constraints. Social workers are often held responsible for systemic failures, leading to a culture of blame and risk management rather than one of a strengths based collaborative approach towards resolving issues at an individual level and connecting those to the broader structural issues that impact overall well-being. And of course, in our current global environment, over the last 40 years, we've seen the rise of neoliberalism and its cousin, managerialism and globalization, which of course has eroded Canada's capacity for economic independence, as well as really created some challenges within the delivery of social work and social work services. I often ask this question when we were live with the live audience. I won't do it now, but if folks want to consider how many of you are supervised or report directly to another social worker. More and more often, that is not the case, and that we are reporting to folks either outside of the profession who don't have the same ethical lens, or in some cases, folks who really don't understand the core value or mission of social work, that managerialism starts to become about risk management, starts to become about efficiencies rather than again, the moral and ethical dimensions that social work face on a daily basis and how we can work together to be able to have a greater impact. So Weinberg advocates for a more expansive view of ethics that includes systemic factors and structural factors, and that social workers should critically examine the power structures they operate within and their own roles in perpetuating or challenging these structures. An ethical practice should involve, of course, self-reflexivity, a great deal of humility, and a recognition in the inherent paradoxes that social work exists. And so the new National Code of Ethics takes up this call and does create a different context within the Code of Ethics for how we apply an ethical lens, really, again, leaning into the need for social action, for structural change, and recognizing how those broader systems shape our conduct and shape our relationships. So I'm just going to go through the next series of slides to outline some of the core shifts that are reflected in the need to broaden our lens in this new version. So the first is a focus both on decolonization and reparations. The 2026 Code of Ethics explicitly embeds decolonization and reparations as a foundational principle requiring active engagement at an individual, community, and macro level. And it's incumbent on social workers to understand those lenses and what their ethical obligations are. Of course, at the root of that is doing no harm. And recognizing again both the legacies and continuation, the anti-Black racism and the genocide of Indigenous peoples within Canada, working to ensure that First Nations have control of their land, that UNDRIP, United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People, are upheld, and that we're empowering again self-governance and supporting decolonization in our own practice as well as within our systems that we work within, and reparations as well. A commitment to doing no more harm to both materially and morally, making up for the legacy of enslavement and anti-Black racism in Canada. And working again in solidarity to ensure that these systems are corrected. The old Code of Ethics, of course, emphasized social justice, but really it was a broad focus, and it did not have the same explicit focus, particularly on decolonization or reparations. As I mentioned earlier, this new Code of Ethics puts together that cultural responsiveness is competent social work, and that competent social work means being culturally responsive. And it does mandate cultural responsiveness and the integration of Indigenous and Afrocentric knowledge systems. The college for the last 4 years has been actively putting out professional development content both on Afrocentric social work practice as well as Indigenous ways of knowing. A great place to start to engage if you haven't already, to start to integrate some of these principles into your practice and your focuses. The CASW, again, the old one focused more generally on respecting diversity. In fact, the old code of ethics only spoke to diversity, equity, and inclusion. It did not mention racism in any context. It did not mention, of course, reconciliation or reparations, because in 2004, those were far away from our public discourse and are now front and center in terms of how we should be and need to be operating. In terms of, again, expanding the view in this code of ethics, the scope of social justice does change. It expands social justice to include environmental stewardship, reparations for historical injustices, and targeted advocacy for Indigenous, African, Nova Scotian, Acadian, and disability communities, and frames social justice primarily around, or sorry, the old code of ethics frames social justice primarily around equitable resource distribution and reducing barriers to that. The new one is far more explicit in terms of our roles and actions that we need to be considering when working with communities here in Nova Scotia. In terms of ethical decision making, as mentioned, this new code of ethics promotes a systemic perspective, urging consideration of the structural determinants of health and the historical contexts, and emphasizes, as the old version emphasized, individual professional judgment and consultation as the primary tool for resolving ethical dilemmas. So there's much more of a structural focus. And again, it's important. This document, we hope, also becomes a core tool and understanding the role of social work within our systems as well, in that we do name and bring forward how social workers would actualize the social determinants of health, which is core to, of course, our mission as social work. And it does differentiate us from other professions, particularly within the healthcare system. Of course, social and structural determinants of health are mentioned. Social work, because of its worldview, where it places the person in the context of their environment and does assessments from a biopsychosocial lens, does have a more robust understanding of how the structural determinants of health impact the care of service users, clients, patients, and to impact their overall well-being. And so that becomes really central in how we make decisions around how we serve the folks that we see. And then professional development. So the new code of ethics, section 7 in particularly, really requires a deeper level of critical self-reflection with a particular focus on humility leading to cultural responsiveness. The old code of ethics, of course, encouraged competence, but did not mandate the same level of continuous targeted learning towards cultural responsiveness. So also coming forward with this new code of ethics and standards of practice is for those who hold the title of clinical specialist, those who are providing clinical services in a private setting, we have put together a standards of practice for clinical specialists. And I'm what you consider an elder millennial. When I was going to high school, if folks can remember, we had overheads, plastic overheads that oftentimes teachers would use, and then they would layer other overheads on top of it. That is how the new clinical standards of practice are meant to be used. If you look at the general standards of practice and you're a clinical specialist, you would layer them on top of the generalist practices, and it gives you some other considerations to be making in terms of that clinical care, particularly around ensuring that we are providing a biopsychosocial spiritual assessment rooted in, of course, trauma-informed and family and person-centered practice. It provides more clarity in terms of the type of interventions, how we co-create and develop those with the folks that we serve, and again, is meant to encourage a more holistic framework for providing that clinical care. And it's meant to complement the generalized and the general standards of practice to go a little bit deeper into some of the areas of clinical specialization. So, in terms of the core values, so these are the higher level pieces that are embedded in the code of ethics, and under each of them are guiding principles and standards of practice and practice context. But again, 7 core values. Some new ones, some old ones, but in terms of their application, we framed the core differences there in terms of why these are different. But of course, central to this and to the relationship is respecting the dignity and worth of all people. And ensuring that the inherent value, human rights, and self determination of every individual is maintained. Promoting social justice becomes the second value, advocating for fair and equitable access to resource and opportunities while actively working to dismantle oppression, racism, and discrimination are key within that value set. And the new value, pursuing truth and reconciliation, which is again committing to the process of decolonization and reconciliation, acknowledging historical injustices, and incorporating Indigenous worldviews into our practice in order to better serve and in order to, again, really meet our commitment to reconciliation as a profession that was active in the genocide of Indigenous peoples in Canada. Um, Central, of course, to social work practice is our commitment to human relationships. And central to, again, the code of ethics is the role of social work to act in the best interest of the people that we serve. There is often a lot of conflict that comes from that, right? As our systems are pretty top down, very risk focused. Oftentimes, what we see is systems operating in a way that is system focused. Core reports that we've seen in Nova Scotia have identified this, whether it be the inquiry into the Home for Colored Children, as well as the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's report. Those broader reports all point to systems operating to protect themselves. And that puts social work in a great deal of tension a lot of the time, as our goal is to serve the best interest of our clients. And as much as we hope that our systems would be aligned with that goal, sometimes they are not. And that, of course, creates tension. And why it is central for an ethical social worker to continue to place the well-being of individuals at the center of all professional relationships and fostering connections built on respect, empathy, and trust. Preserving professional practice is also there. And remains there with some strengthened provisions around acting with honesty, responsibility, and accountability, while also maintaining clear professional boundaries. Again, professional boundaries are always a challenge in a small province like Nova Scotia, where again, almost 48% of you are working in rural areas where communities and relationships look different. Boundaries are sometimes more blurred. And so the new code of ethics does try and provide some more guidance and clarity around things like dual relationships, boundary setting in a relational context, and always noting that even though we are co-creating meaning, sharing power, a social worker is always in a position of power, and it is on them to facilitate and collaborate in these professional relationships while maintaining, again, their professional boundaries in a way that acknowledges the power that they have in these relationships. Maintaining privacy and confidentiality, of course, remains central to social work practice and how we move forward. And the safeguarding of trust placed in the professional relationship by protecting, of course, client information and the right to privacy. It also expands on documentation, the need for co-creation, recognizing that documentation is power, and that, again, that should be power that's shared with the folks that we serve. And of course, as I mentioned repeatedly, and will continue to, is that competent social work practice is a culturally responsive practice. So committing to lifelong learning, ensuring that we are being self-reflective and utilizing different research-based and inclusive practices to be able to meet the needs of diverse population become really central to that. A couple of underlying foundations. I am going to pause for some questions before we hit our break too, if anything's popping up for folks as well. But just want to continue with some of these foundational pieces first. So foundational assumptions within the code of ethics. One is that ethical practice, again, the idea is that ethical moral decision making is an active, reflective, and system oriented process, moves beyond simply rule following, more integrated into a socially conscious approach. So, what that means is that the code assumes that ethical practice is inseparable from the principles of decolonization, reparations, and cultural responsiveness, and it calls on social workers to actively engage in these processes. It also is aimed at addressing systemic injustice as a core responsibility. It is assumed that social workers have a professional and ethical role to identify and address systemic barriers and historical injustices that impact the individual, community, or service that they are delivering, particularly with and alongside structurally marginalized communities. This code of ethics also does make a clear commitment for social workers to be engaged in actively addressing equity, diversity, and inclusion, ensuring, again, that ethical and moral decision making is informed through an active commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion, which requires, of course, the person to look beyond individual cases into the broader systems of power and privilege and how that impacts our service, our delivery, the well-being of our clients, and how those structures are influencing both our own worldviews, biases, as well as impacting our service users and bringing those together to create some meaning towards greater healing. So again, the new code of ethics extending from the idea that social workers are operating beyond just the individual and into systems. It is again our modern responsibilities emphasizing the proactive roles in both individual and broader society change. These responsibilities extend beyond just direct provision of service to encompass accountability for creating a more just and equitable world. Sorry, skip there. So there is a focus on system change. That ethical decision making is not limited to the individual interactions. It includes responsibilities for advocating and for creating systemic change that promotes justice and equity. It also assumes it is the responsibility of the social worker to integrate diverse knowledge systems, recognizing that there are rich traditions of healing with both Indigenous communities as well as Afrocentric knowledge, as well as other cultural practices that could be blended with Western approaches through a two-eyed seeing approach in some cases to ensure more holistic and culturally relevant analysis and care. Again, core to this code of ethics as well, we're going to practice some of this today, is the need for consistent and constant critical self-reflection. As all of you have degrees in social work, of course, you know that within your social work education, the role of critical self-reflection is embedded throughout that process. Oftentimes, when we get into our workplaces and our work environments, that role of critical self-reflection is not dominant, and oftentimes there isn't space for it in our day-to-day. But this code of ethics does emphasize that that role needs to be and that time and that practice needs to be central to our day-to-day practice, and that we continuously engage in self-reflection and understand our biases, values, of course, our position of power, and how those things influence our professional judgment. And that, again, we practice cultural humility in order to be more culturally responsive. Again, ethical and moral reasoning is grounded in cultural humility, which involves being a lifelong learner, recognizing what we don't know, and prioritizing the lived experiences and perspectives of service users. And there's a commitment to ongoing professional development towards those goals. So, um, we are going to take a break in a minute. Again, this is an online format. So generally when I've been presenting this, I can see people's expressions and faces and can see if they have something to say or comment along the way. I wanted to give a pause before we go on break just to see if there are any comments, questions, concerns in regards to that introduction to where we've landed and where we're going across the board.
Firstly, Alec, I'll let you know that in the chat that there were some people really relating to the double layer overhead projector analogy. Elder millennials were like, "Yep, we get it."
We get it. I've been there. Did anything stand out in that presentation of where we've landed, how we've gotten here? Dennis.
Yeah, I have first of all, this is exciting to me. And I want to say this in front of this whole peer group. I've never been more excited to be a social worker. I can see myself. I can see my work. I can see everything I've done in these 38 years I've been working, in that document. I thank you greatly. Our leadership is strong here, and you need to hear that. Thank you, is my first thing. Number two is something I always thought we needed more of in our profession is advocation. And number two there says that. Can you speak to me about that? Because I've always thought for change to happen, system change to happen, particularly,
Mm,
we have to step on that line. Robert Wright said to me one time, it's like that in Olympics, that triple jump. Everybody to be successful, always goes be way, way behind the line. They jump a foot behind the line so they don't fault. But I think we have to fault. We have to step on that line, and take that risk. So, can you speak to me about a modern day? This is 2025, what social work advocating looks like.
uh, Dennis, you are great at segueing. When we come back, we're
Okay.
gonna layer that how some approaches to doing that.
Thank you.
So I don't want to jump too far ahead because that's what the next couple hours is going to look like. So we're going to walk through critical self-reflection, intersectional lens, then look at again social policy and a social policy tool, start to understand how we can understand systems, and then start to talk about action. And to your point, when we talk about action, we'll talk about the fact that there is no resistance without risk, right? And so understanding that risk becomes imperative to how we might resist or advocate for change. So we're going to do all that this afternoon, if you can hold on, or not even this
I
afternoon, later this morning.
I will wait patiently. Thank you again. Mean it. I mean that from my heart.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give a couple more seconds just to see if anyone else had a question or comment in regards to that initial presentation. Okay, not seeing any. You can write in the chat if you did have something as well. We're going to take our first break. So go replenish your coffee. For the rest of this training, we will be moving through some core content and then into small breakout groups, then a report back with another couple breaks. So be prepared to come back engaged, and we'll start that process. So we'll come back so let's see, Tyler has continued the recording. Welcome everyone back. Hope folks had a nice little break. Um, okay, so I'm going to get us set up for our first activity. I'm just going to share my screen again here. All right. So again, as I mentioned, because Dennis was able to set us up for where we're going to go, is we're going to start to layer on just some different lenses and some tools that we think will be helpful in applying this new code of ethics. So the first, of course, is recognizing the relational ethics and the co-creating of meaning in social work. And what this looks like in practice is, of course, bringing intersectionality to life. Intersectionality was a concept that we first started to learn about through lawyer Kimberly Crenshaw in the States, who started to look particularly at the how justice was applied and how it often was able to apply one lens, maybe being able to understand racial injustice in the States, but not able to layer multiple identities together. So, for instance, right, when we look at both how folks are privileged or experience oppression, we know because of, again, our history and our roots that patriarchy is still alive and well. In most of the world, you can look no further than the report that came out of the IWK what 5 or 6 weeks ago now, I believe, that was looking particularly at women's health and very much indicated that most of our medical system is still fundamentally rooted in the care of people who look like me, white cisgender men, and that care across the board for folks who maybe women or non-binary is not there. Patriarchy is alive and well, and folks experience oppression along those lines. So what Kimberly Crenshaw started to talk a lot about is the fact that you can experience oppression as a woman for lots of different in lots of different areas of life. But again, if you are a racialized person or a Black woman, you experience a different level of oppression or different experiences within that. And so when we look at relational ethics and a co-creating of meaning in social work, being able to understand that intersectionality in practice becomes key. Because again, what we're looking to do and achieve in this relational ethical model is to move beyond a one-way care model, where it's just me providing expert, or you as the social worker providing expert care to the service user or the community in front of you. Care exists, or the concept of relational ethics exists in what my friend Dwayne Massing, who edited a book on social work ethics in 2017, it calls third space. And this is the idea that, again, the service user, client patient, is coming into a helping relationship, and that again, service user has their own experiences, has their own bias, has their own lens and understanding, and their own points of tension that have brought them into the pathway of a social worker's care. At the same point in time, the social worker cannot deny or put aside the fact that they have been shaped by social, economic, political forces, a journey along the way, and they hold certain worldviews, biases, and understanding of the context themselves. And in the middle, again, in that care and that mutual understanding and that building meaning together happens in between those two identities in what my friend Dwayne Massing calls the third space. And a care is a shared process, not solely about the professional or the service user, but creating meaning together. Now, what that means, and don't get me wrong, what I'm not saying that within this helping relationship that the social worker should be laying all of their trauma or their baggage or their background on the table for their service user to make meaning of. Well, always it is on the professional social worker to be able to negotiate and facilitate those conversations. What we mean by that is that when we're co-creating meaning, when we're in the space together, that we can bring empathy to that to that relationship. And in fact, that's primary to maintaining dignity and worth of all individuals. And that empathy is shaped by an understanding of folks' experiences, a connection to the feelings that might be had in that moment, and an understanding within ourselves that that in order for care to happen, that empathy needs to be connected to experiences of within ourselves, so that we can move together in a pathway of healing and growth. Um, Again, that doesn't mean that we are disclosing our own history. That might be a tool that is useful from time to time, but that's not what this is intended to do. It's intended to convey empathy. It's intended to be able to build meaning and be able to share experiences towards creating an equality in humanity, recognizing that we are both uh, that both the professional and the service user are equal in their humanness, in their flaws, in their strengths, and that working together to create a better pathway forward is key there. Always the professional responsibility to maintain those boundaries and facilitate that conversation in a way that conveys empathy. That also is accountable back to the service user and to the values that we hold, and to ensure that we are working together towards an intervention that is going to be aligned with healing, growth, accountability, and in the context of both the service user and the professional's experiences. So, how we start to apply that or understand it more. A lot of that happens through the process of storytelling. And social workers are very embedded in hearing folks' stories, as well as telling stories ourselves towards the creation of change and social change across the board. And storytelling, of course, is a mechanism for critical self reflection and critical reflection and meaning making. So, storytelling is much like an archaeological dig. It often uncovers different layers along the way, each holding different meaning and context. And the act of storytelling uncovers these layers, sometimes slowly, but always deliberately, in a way to understand the landscape of consciousness. So stories aren't just narratives, they are a reflection of our inner world. They reveal the thoughts, emotions, and perspectives that shape our understanding and experiences. Beyond exploring this landscape, again, we engage in critical reflection, uncovering deeper insights about ourselves and the world. So, storytelling becomes essential to a relational ethical process, being able to hear, being able to tell, and being able to co create and relate to one another in a way that allows us to be meaningful and purposeful in the interventions that we are delivering. So I want to start again by sharing my story with you, dissecting that a little bit, and then inviting you to do this in small groups as well. So I've delivered a variation of this ethical workshop since I started at the college almost 10 years ago. And for those who might have caught that older version, I often start with my story here in Halifax. I grew up not too far from the offices of the college. I grew up in a single parent household. My mom was a teacher, and I had a brother with a disability. And I'm going to come back to this story because as I went through my own professional journey, I think I started to recognize that my story towards social work, which is what I'm going to tell, started long before I think I was born. And if you look at this picture down in the corner here, this is a picture that I found in the Glenbow Museum in Alberta. And it's a picture of, this picture is taken on the Blood Reserve, Treaty 6 in Alberta at the turn of the last century. And I don't know if you can see my cursor, I'm over somebody's face right now. This man in the hat was my great great grandfather, Samuel Trivet. Samuel Trivet was an Anglican missionary from Cape Breton who was sent by the church. Any guesses on why the church might send a white missionary to to Alberta to work in treaty territory? Yeah, obviously he was there to colonize. And he literally, there are journals and inscriptions of and pictures of him literally laying the foundation for what became St. Paul's Residential School. This narrative and the story that I was always told of the Reverend Samuel Trivet was one of a hero, one of a pioneer, one of bravery, who went out to the rugged Alberta wilderness to work with the folks on this reserve, and to, of course, bring the teachings of the Anglican Church into their lives. Now, although there are stories within those artifacts of him standing up to the quote unquote Indian agents of the time, it doesn't take away from the truth of the matter, that he literally laid the foundation for the genocide of Indigenous people across Canada. And although I am not him and I'm not responsible for his actions, his story and his legacy and how it was told to me does matter in terms of my practice and in terms of my identity. And so my journey to social work started long before I was born, in my opinion. And it wasn't until I was working as a social worker in Edmonton. And we were asked to go and provide mental health support for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission on the testimonies that were being delivered. And as I sat there listening to the testimony of Indigenous peoples in Alberta, all of a sudden this story dawned on me. And it hadn't dawned on me until that very moment, that this was my family's history, and that this is the legacy that I carry, and also the legacy that I think binds me to the practice and the purpose of reconciliation and decolonization. So that was some of my earliest experiences. My journey started before. I then, as I mentioned, grew up in a home in Halifax with a single mom and a brother with a disability, and really did see firsthand how, again, systems treat people who are different. My mom had to advocate left, right, and center to have my brother's needs met. And I certainly saw some of the foundations of what advocacy looks like at that level. I laugh. I know I make fun of Dennis quite a bit. I shouldn't say make fun. Dennis Adams was my high school social worker, and so knows my family well. Worked with my brother, so I always get a kick out of seeing Dennis in these meetings and engaging in this way. Sorry to call you out, Dennis, but I know you'd appreciate that as well. And so I often wasn't a great student either. I felt a little lonely and isolated in my family, and so most of the time was not in school. You'd probably find me in the commons. That was I was most of the time, because my bigger connection was always back to a summer camp that I went to when I was a kid, and then certainly stayed there probably longer than I should have, because it meant a great deal to me. And I think my earliest roots into social work practice were at this summer camp, both as a camper, but then as a counselor, because I was always the counselor that asked to have the most challenging kids in my cabin, the ones with more complex behaviors who didn't always fit in. And I took a great deal of joy and pride in working with them to connect them into that community, to the land, and to the space, and certainly some of my early foundations in calling into social work. As I mentioned, I wasn't a great student, but knew that I needed to do enough to carry on after high school, so started to do that. And as I started to graduate, I started to contemplate what to do next. And as I mentioned, I grew up in a single parent household. My father died when I was about 18 months old, and I didn't really know him, but he was a social worker. And so going into social work was also another way to get to know him, and his identity and who he was. So there were a number of factors, and a number of contributors that led me into this field. And I think that many of us may have some parallels, may have some similarities, but our stories tell a lot about ourselves, our identity, our biases, our beliefs, and are an important practice in critical self-reflection, and in understanding how we come together through a relational ethical approach. So what I'm going to invite now, is we're going to put folks back into their groups, and we're going to invite you to share your story with your group. So really, you won't have as long as I did. I took more time probably than I should have in terms of modeling this, because we're only going to have about 15 minutes for this activity. But share in your groups your personal story of how you came to social work, and consider how storytelling reveals the thoughts, emotions, perspectives that shape your understanding and your experiences and your draw into social work. And then as a group, see if there are some parallels, see if there are some things that align your journey to social work, or if there are some differences. And then we'll come back together as a larger group, and I'll ask for some folks to share what that experience was like. Just before we go into groups, for folks who are watching this later on YouTube, as you won't have the option to be in a group, I want you just to take some time to write your personal story about how you came to social work, reflect on the experiences, motivations, and moments that led you to this path, and then consider, again, some of those landscapes of consciousness. So, how storytelling reveals thoughts, emotions, perspectives. And then again, engage and critically reflect on how your journey might be unique, how it might differ from others in terms of how you came to social work practice. So going back to the small groups, I think Tyler's going to put you back into those right now. We'll bring you back. I'll give you till 11:15, so you really have good time. I know when we did this event live, I kept trying to bring folks back, and people kept saying, "No, we need more time." So I'll give you 18. We got about 18 minutes at this point in time. Okay. So, as we mentioned, and as that first activity started to ground us in, is that critical self reflection is key to the application of these new code of ethics. Whether it be valuing human relationships where self awareness and reflection guide practice and well being, being culturally responsive to understand our gaps, the areas that we need to do work in, and to embrace a cultural humility lens, to respecting dignity and worth. Sorry, had a sneeze coming. In respecting dignity and worth, critical self-reflection helps us address our privilege as well as understand different areas of inclusion and diversity. And there are core themes throughout the code of ethics in regards to examining personal beliefs, biases, power dynamics, to continuously learning. And again, we know that critical self-reflection is core to, as folks mentioned already, building resiliency, which is core to challenging burnout. But it's also key, you also engaged in you've been engaging in conversations and expressing and connecting ideas. And that's really critical to self-reflection as well, whether it be in a community group, a group of practice, or with your supervision or through mentorship. Bringing these issues to light, doing that deeper reflection is core to an application of this newer ethical framework. Again, and there are more than just this framework for critical self-reflection, right? Frameworks for reflective practice allow us to blend Indigenous and Western knowledge as well as bringing an Afrocentric understanding Ubuntu and the ability to connect to our collective identities, to communities, and to a sense of spirituality, back to, again, different pillars of hope and different understandings of the relationship that we hold and hold with each other. Matters because ultimately it enhances our ethical decision making, builds stronger non-judgmental relationships, and promotes personal growth and accountability across the board. So again, to deepen our understanding of intersectionality, I introduced the concept originally here with Kimberly Crenshaw's earlier writings. On your right here is another lens that we can apply to understanding our intersectional identities and how they impact our ability to enter into a relational ethical relationship. And again, what intersectionality allows us to understand is that many of us hold different aspects of power and privilege, as well as identities where we might experience oppression along the way. And that those are in flux and shaped again by the dominant worldviews in our society. and the public and political discourse that happens. So on the right, you can see, again, some different areas by which we might identify or be identified, because that's the other thing as well, is we might be identified in a certain way. At the center of this circle is where we would put power, where those who might identify along these lines hold more privilege than others. On the outside, again, is where we might experience oppression. And these, as I mentioned, are shaped by our public and political discourse, by our systems and our structures. For instance, housing. Housing is an example where we do have areas, clear areas of how you're viewed and how you're served based on your housing status. Again, if you are privileged enough to own a home or, have a bank that owns a home that you're paying back the bank for, then there is more privilege in that right now. Most of our policies in Canada, in Nova Scotia, are rooted towards privileging and maintaining the power of those who own homes or property in our society, versus those that rent. The reality is that we have created a class of citizens in Nova Scotia and in Canada, and the tenant class does not do as well as the owner class, and we've built policies to entrench that oppression, whether it be from a lack of tenant landlord regulation, rent control, the availability of affordable housing, or the fact that your rent can go up by 5% every year. Right? People who own homes, generally their mortgage is set for a period of time and they're not seeing increases on a year-to-year basis. To all the way to being unhoused, right? If you lack a home, you are treated differently from our systems and how we're shaped. You can look at that too in terms of even how languages exist in our society. In Nova Scotia, in particular, again, there are predominantly, if you speak English and your first language is English, you experience different privileges and power. We know in Nova Scotia that even our second official language of French in Nova Scotia is not well served. There are huge areas and gaps in terms of being able for Francophone speakers to receive services in their first language of French. You are treated differently because of that. And if you don't speak French or English, then again, the ability to be able to navigate, negotiate, or receive services becomes even more challenged along those lines. And you can do that with a number of these identifying factors. Whether it be, again, how you were born. If you were born in a family with wealth, you have started in a very different place from somebody who might have been born in poverty. The reality is that social mobility is not really a thing at this point in time, because of the structures and the systems that have reinforced the wealth, particularly the wealth hoarding of a few rich people in our society. And all of our systems at this point in time are designed to shift and transfer wealth up. Maintaining your poverty if you were born that way, or maintaining your wealth. And so your experience is very different based on how you were born, in terms of class, and of course many of these other areas. So it's important when we are entering relationships, helping ones in particular, to understand our power and our context and how that was shaped, and to start to understand and unpack how those that we work with might be shaped by these different pillars and forces. So we are going to get back into groups again. I'm going to ask folks to take a moment by themselves to reflect on their intersecting identities and how this might impact their privileges and biases. And then to reconnect with your group members and talk about, again, what that understanding has brought to you and how it might shape your interaction with other people's stories, with other people's privilege and oppression, and how understanding those intersectional identities might allow us to convey more empathy and connect more clearly with the folks that we serve. So, and those watching online or later on, you can do the same activity by yourself and do some deeper reflection in terms of how those identities impact your ability to relate and connect to various people. Okay. So to Dennis's earlier question, in terms of how do we start to turn our ethical obligations into action? In 2021, the college worked with our partners at the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives to produce a core tool to help and support this work. It's our social policy framework. Interestingly enough, we launched the framework on the very same day that it was declared a global pandemic, which was really interesting because we were talking about how this tool it was fundamentally needed now more than ever as we entered into a period of really seeing where many of the weaknesses in our system existed and how we could strengthen them. So, in terms of our ethical obligations towards social action and social justice, this tool I think can be really handy in building both an understanding of where our policies and may be falling short at this moment in time, as well as proposing new policies. I can say that we use this consistently in our policy work, whether it be creating a core housing policy paper with partners where we utilize this framework, to being able to critique the current government's mental health and addiction strategy, to being able to propose changes in child and family well-being. We find it useful in terms of understanding how our systems can be strengthened and the type of action that we can take to be able to deliver real substantial change to folks who need it the most. So Tyler did put the social policy framework link in the chat. You can access it there while I kind of set us up for it. And again, it is rooted in the idea that our policies should be evidence informed, recognizing again that a combination of both quantitative and qualitative inputs and data are really essential to understanding how we can build a better system. There are a series of interconnecting guiding principles. I'll go through them in a moment, all rooted in an evidence-informed and intersectional basis for developing policy, and include things such as decolonization, social inclusion, universality, to ensure that policies align with the goals of equity, sustainability, and collective well-being. The tool can be used as an accountability measure, both in terms of progress and outcomes towards our shared goals, as well as to evaluate transparency and decision making across the board. But most importantly, I think that what the tool really conveys is the need for collaborative democratic governance, recognizing that the folks that our systems are meant to serve, their voice is often not included in the development of policy, and that we need to really ground ourselves in a much more substantial community collective collaborative process towards the development of our policies that shape our society in so many fundamental ways in order to see any kind of meaningful change happen, not just at the structural level, but at the individual level as well. Our systems are so shaped by our policies that a simple change, even in terms of, I'll give you an example in terms of the child tax benefit, right, which for many folks living in poverty makes up almost 60% of their income. There was a long practice in Nova Scotia where when a child was being brought into care, oftentimes that child tax benefit was removed from that birth family, which had huge impacts on reunification, health and well-being, and the ability to be able to ensure family preservation. Advocacy from folks within the system as well as outside the system was able to create a change in which that money was not removed, or at least given back in some mentality, so that folks could preserve their homes and make reunification that much more successful. Really, again, policy shapes so much of our interaction with our clients, with our service users, with our communities, that having a good, robust understanding of it makes a big difference in terms of the care that we take, as well as how we can shift and change systems as well. So let me review some of this with you, and then we're going to try and apply some of it. So the tool that Tyler put up there is a workbook that goes through high level the different interconnecting principles, which are here on your screen as well, and start to lay out how we need to consider policy how we want to consider policy decisions, and how we might want to bring different policy options forward. So applying this lens really allows us to be consistent and apply that intersectional lens and root it in some evidence. It is still shocking how a few of our policies are void of evidence in terms of their effectiveness or how they might work. A great example of that, of course, is at the federal government level, where we saw the MOU signed with Alberta this last week, opening up the possibility of a pipeline, which will likely never happen. But more importantly, within that MOU was a complete gutting of Canada's pretty basic environmental policy at this point in time as well. And although the government keeps saying it will not affect their emissions or their emission targets, almost any expert will tell you that it will substantially. Again, we are not making evidence-informed decisions about public policy. We are making political ones most often. And that is something, again, that the tool is meant to reshape for us in terms of what that delivery looks like. So at the top of these interconnected principles is the idea of interconnectedness, and the idea that some policy options will be able to solve multiple problems at once. So for instance, the example, sorry, I'm just going to reshare because I lost you, and there we go. So in terms of our principles, at the top there is the principle of interconnectedness. And what it calls on us to reflect on is how some policies might be able to solve multiple issues at the same time. The example used in the policy tool is a really key one, which is the idea of childcare. Childcare, universal access to childcare is a game changer in many different functions of society. One, there's the obvious ones. Having access to early childhood development is key to overall child and family well-being, and having trained ECEs being able to enhance early childhood development is core to overall well-being. Then there are the less obvious ones. The reality is that childcare as a public policy is demonstrated time and time again that it's one of the most effective economic policies that we can implement. For every dollar spent in the economy, two is returned. It empowers particularly women to engage in the workforce in a different way, and ultimately also employs many folks in the space. That's why it's so striking, again, that in Nova Scotia, we have yet to achieve the promise of $10 a day childcare, and our far behind other provinces at this moment in time. Again, a failure to recognize how substantial of a policy this is to many aspects of our lives and the power that it has. There are many policy positions that would take that position. For instance, income assistance is another one, a very interconnected policy. By raising again the threshold for poverty in Nova Scotia, it does influence wages by changing the wage floor. As both income assistance and minimum wage go up, wages in other parts of the economy will as well. Second to that, we know that income is a fundamental protective factor in lots of different vulnerabilities, including health, well-being, violence, all of those pieces. And we saw from the pandemic, of course, when folks had access to meaningful income, some for the first time through CERB, that many factors of our society started to shift and change. So thinking about interconnected policies really becomes key, and how they influence and impact other areas of care and service. Decolonization is key and crucial to how we move forward together in reconciliation. As Tyler introduced us this morning, of course, he engaged us in the acknowledgement of land. And in that, of course, is the recognition that Mi'kmaq, colonial Nova Scotia, is unceded land. What that means is that there is no deed that Nova Scotia or the government of Canada owns to this land. It is still within the care of Indigenous peoples, the Mi'kmaq, and what that means in terms of how we provide either build an economy or build care sectors is that consultation, real partnership, authentic connection is key and crucial to how we build out social policy and services. Right now, again, our premier has launched a mandate towards resource development. Whether or not that's a good idea, the reality is none of it will be successful without meaningful consultation and without consent, which I do not believe he will receive at this point in time. Decolonization also in social care makes us recognize that we need to ensure that we're building systems that are embedded in Indigenous ways of knowing and cultural connection across the board. Social inclusion is another really core principle. The reality is that much of our systems and policies at this point in time are designed to disconnect us and to put in focus the individual rather than the community. And this isolates us in many ways. You can think again in terms of even how we build public or social housing. Or how we might build housing for folks in the disability community as well. If we're not facilitating the development of homes or communities that are facilitating togetherness, connection, and allowing folks to join in to their community, we are not achieving any kind of meaningful well-being. And in fact, continuing on with that individualistic, disconnected notion. An example of this is, as I mentioned, how we build housing. Looking at universal design, looking at access to transit, or how we look at our wages. For instance, when we look at the living wage calculation and how that is completed, a core factor of that is recognizing that folks do need money to access community, right? Whether it's sports, art, culture, being able to engage in community festivals, having income to be able to do that matters, and ensuring that a living wage is achieved so that folks can participate in their community is really core and crucial. Universality is another really fundamental and crucial policy principle that we need to consider more. If most folks would be familiar with the concept of universality when it comes to healthcare, which the idea again is that you're able to walk in, ideally, to your primary care clinic, be able to access the services that you need without a user fee or being billed for that service, and that you're entitled to that service regardless of your identity, your ability to pay, or without being means tested. We can put that in contrast to a lot of our systems or services that support child and family well-being in Nova Scotia. These are not universal systems of support, even though we want to move to a more proactive system. And what I mean by that is to get access to things like family support, or even more access to things like family coaching or mental health support, or support for kids. Oftentimes, you have to meet a set of criteria or have enough need to access those programs. We need the concept of universality to stem beyond that, so that, particularly in child and family well-being, so that anyone, if we're a truly preventative system, anyone who's struggling as a parent, to which anyone is a parent will struggle at one point in time, would be able to access community supports without the need to demonstrate a need or based on a certain identity or criteria. Universality is really important in terms of building solidarity, particularly as we continue to see a huge divide between rich and poor in our society. That class divide is at the root of the political tensions and the political discourse that we're seeing at this point in time. And although many governments will act to, meet minimal basic needs, a lot of those aren't extended on to either working people or people in the middle class even. And that is a policy shift and change that we need to look at. We have a very, very small window in which we can close the current emissions gap that we have before catastrophic climate change has taken over. And in fact, many scientists are now saying that we've already passed that threshold. What that means is that as social workers, as people who serve community, that facing climate catastrophe is going to be a yearly experience. Within the Code of Ethics that we just designed, there are a number of provisions in regards to climate justice. And I wasn't sure how they would resonate with folks. Tyler and I were in Yarmouth a few weeks ago, and one of the areas that a lot of social workers there were raising with us is that one of the primary pieces that they are dealing with right now, it may have gotten better, but when we were there, still was dry wells and access to water. And the reality that, of course, water is fundamental to life. So case managing by getting access to laundry services, access to water, all of these other pieces, climate justice and responding to climate catastrophe is going to be our future. And we have to be able to think and construct about policies on how those who have done the least to contribute to the climate crisis don't bear the brunt of it. The reality is that the top 20% have burned almost 80% of the emissions that have contributed to the climate crisis. And so when we're shifting towards a greener, cleaner economy, we need to recognize that the burden must be placed on those who have created the problem, not those that have not. You can even think about policies like coastal protection. Right. The Coastal Protection Act, which was adopted and passed by all parties, was meant to be put in place to ensure that our coastline it wasn't eroded or washed away, and that we built the infrastructure to ensure that the catastrophe from environmental crises kept intact the economic, cultural, and social significance of our coastlines. Again, the current government decided that it was better for developers to build on those coastlines than to protect them. So we didn't see that come through. And ultimately, again, it will be working poor people who bear the brunt of that decision, as it will be them who might not be able to access a road because it's been washed out by a catastrophic storm, or have their power out for days because crews can't get to them to be able to access that. Those are the type of policies when we're thinking about climate justice that we need to be thinking about. Decent work and well-being is another one. and another really core principle when we're thinking about overall health and well-being in our society, and something that we need to change. The reality is that our living wage compared to our minimum wage at this point in time is almost $10 an hour. No, more than that. It's almost $12 an hour in terms of the difference between making a minimum wage. We also know that with the gig economy, the precariousness of work, not to mention that if anyone ever opens up the Labor Standards Act, there's at least 2 pages of industries that are exempt from labor standards altogether. This includes some of our primary industries like agriculture, fishing, as well as construction. Nova Scotia has some of the lowest labor standards in Canada. And even if you're working construction, particularly in an ununionized position, you have to work 108 hours before your employer is legally obligated to pay you overtime. The basic rate is 48 hours, which is the longest work week in Canada. In order for health and well-being, social connection, and inclusion to happen, folks need access to decent work and well-being. And looking at our labor standards, how we employ, and ensuring that, again, our economy is functioning and working for everyone is really key there. Public provision is another really important policy provision that we need to be thinking about and accessing, particularly as, those who might know Naomi Klein's book, The Shock Doctrine, which is a book about disaster capitalism. When disaster strikes, we ultimately see figures come in and push us towards more privatization, which ultimately drives inequality and impacts the care of vulnerable folks in our society. Right now, we see that disaster capitalism playing out at both the federal and provincial level, particularly with the trade war that we exist in. The first thing that Tim Houston did in a moment of threat to our economy was immediately rescind decades-long fights to have uranium and fracking banned in Nova Scotia, which we know are fundamental to protecting the health and well-being in the land of folks in our society. And so, in that disaster capitalism moment, that push for privatization, that push for opening up more supports through the private market is put forefront. We have to resist that by building programs that are delivered through the public provision. Public programs across the board are hold more quality, are less susceptible to cuts. You can think about, again, now that this government is in a position where the revenue is starting to dry up, the first thing they're looking at is cutting community grants, right? Services to not-for-profits and issues like that. Much easier to cut those programs than it is to cut public services or public provision of services. So we have to resist, again, privatization as a whole. Privatization drives inequality, which, again, is fundamentally detrimental to the health and well-being of our society. And so looking at public provision in the delivery of programs really needs to be key and fair. And then there's fiscal fairness. The reality is that in order to pay for the public programs, universality, the climate justice measures, social inclusion, and interconnected policies, we need to have a good progressive tax base. And although our taxes are progressive in name, the reality is over the last 40 years, they've become less and less progressive as wages for working and middle class folks have remained stagnant, and wages for particularly the top 20% have increased exponentially. What that means right now is that in proportion to salaries, those at the top are paying far less than those in the middle and working class, who have less of a capacity to pay for the systems that we need to ensure good quality, well-being, and collective fairness across the board. So pushing for a truly progressive tax system, including recognizing that we need to tax capital. What I mean by that is that if I own an asset or if I own stocks or bonds and I sell those are taxed at a much lesser rate than your labor. at this point in time. So there's an unfairness to that needs to be addressed. So creating a truly progressive tax system that prevents the hoarding of wealth at the top so that we can actually build things that are going to substantially impact our well-being, such as public transportation, the hospitals, the healthcare, the daycare, pharmacare. These pieces are substantially needed, particularly in the face of an unprecedented cost of living crisis, which has continued to see us funnel wealth up to the top rather than ensuring that those who need it the most have access to it. Shared governance, as I mentioned, is another core policy provision that we need to look at. The reality is that too often political decision makers will default to another order of government, saying it's not my responsibility, it's theirs. We certainly saw this when we were fighting for the child tax benefit. Not being removed from birth families, in which the federal government said that, oh, that's a matter of provincial regulation, and the provincial government said, no, that's a matter of federal regulation. The reality is it ought not matter. Everyone is serving the same people, and that we need to have shared governance, particularly with First Nations as well. And finally, and really fundamentally, is that we have continued to see policies drift and move towards very top-down systems of decision making, where power becomes more and more entrenched in the hands of a few decision makers. Both in Nova Scotia and in Ottawa, a lot of our elected officials are disempowered by the offices of the leaders. And we have a few unelected people with an elected premier or prime minister making a lot of decisions on our behalf. If we are to face the challenges that we face right now, particularly the rise of fascism and authoritarianism, we have to move to systems that allow for a democratization of decision making, ensuring that, again, community voices are well heard and discussed and brought into the forefront of how we make political program and policy decisions. So that's a high-level review of this tool. Again, in our YouTube channel, you'll find different webinars on its use and its application. I encourage folks to explore it. But in terms of our ethical framework, we're introducing or reintroducing this tool as a mechanism to ensure that in our helping and supportive relationships, we're making connections back to the structural policy issues that impact care and well-being so that we can address them and advocate for different shifts and changes within them. So we're going to put you back into your small groups again, and we're going to ask you to start to talk about this a little bit more. So we're going to ask that you get into your small group and identify a system issue that you're currently facing or have faced. Start to apply some of these different policy principles, where they might fit, which policies might land, how they are interconnected. And then I'm going to welcome you back and we'll have some more sharing around that. We are only going to take 10 minutes to do that because we are quickly running out of time and I got a few more things that we want to do. So 10 minutes, small groups, and then we'll come back together. I recognize that's not a lot of time for big structural issues, but give it a try. So to Patricia's point is I'm going to touch briefly on this. We got some early feedback that people needed more breaks, so we integrated that and just haven't had much time for this in our session, which I can understand. So just quickly, I wanted to introduce you to this tool that Patricia just mentioned, which is a tool we met with the Nova Scotia Legal Information Society, which is the We Have Power Guide. And within it is a process that lays out, again, just how decisions are made, our points of intervention, particularly in the political policy process, and starts to give us an idea, again, of how we can target specific language to specific action, and that there's a need to continue to empower both our service users as well as ourselves to be able to engage in this process. Because the only thing that has ever created change in our society is people's working together towards a collective change in some way. So understanding our power, understanding where and how we can influence change, and understanding how our systems work become fundamental to that. So this tool is there to support both you and your clients do that. But I do want to talk for a moment about how most often, and this tool is rooted in change from outside of systems. And, the college is certainly in that position where, we are an independent organization. We don't operate within systems, and so can push change from the outside. That is a privilege that we have. And is not the reality of many Nova Scotian, many Nova Scotian social workers who work within systems. So I just wanted to take a minute in terms of what we've learned about change from within systems, and give some reflection there for a minute. Is that when we're talking about change from within systems, one of the things that we need to understand, or part of that critical reflection that needs to happen, is an understanding of your own social capital. Social capital, again, like political capital or economic capital, is kind of a currency that we build up. Sorry to use capitalist terms, but the reality is that as we perform well within our organizations, as we build credibility among our peers and among our leaders, as we are seen as more as kind of constructive contributors, that builds our social capital. And our ability to link that social capital with decision makers or with peers towards that change becomes really imperative in terms of how we might get listened to, or building more credibility in terms of those arguments. And so being conscious about where our social capital exists and how we can link it becomes really key. In terms of, and as I mentioned in some of the start of this, is that there is no resistance without risk. And so understanding what risks you carry and where you can resist is really crucial in doing this type of work. So again, it is not expected, and in fact, many of you would not likely be able to go to your local MLA and say, "Hey, I work in this program. I want you to hear all the problems with it." How that might pose a lot of risk. Also, doing things individually. So oftentimes, if you're the only person speaking up in your organization, that creates a lot of risk for yourself and for others around you. So understanding your contracts, your union rights, your policies and procedures, knowing the strengths and limitations. This is what I think Dennis was referring to earlier on about knowing where the line was, and looking to push that in some way. Consciously engaging and understanding the potential challenges and preparing for them are really important. But what's more important is the ability to do this through collective action. Recognizing again that if you can unite your voices consistently, and here's the thing that I've learned, and I think those of us who work in the space of social action have learned, is that rarely will one meeting or raising a concern once solve the problem. It is usually persistence that does. It is usually the persistence to not let the issue go, to consistently raise it and propose the solution whenever you're given the opportunity, and to do that as a collective voice makes a difference and can make a difference. So maintaining a consistent message, and in fact, we have Power Guide can help with that, tailored to specific audience for maximum impact, and recognizing that we are all in this for the long haul. Again, that change doesn't come easily. I can tell you again that the college has been advocating for a child and youth advocate office for almost 10 years now. And before that, the first call for a child and youth advocate office came in 1997 out of the Nunn Inquiry. And I can say that we have been as consistent as we can be whenever we're talking about the issue of child and family well-being. Whenever we're talking about kids in general, we're positioning back to the need for a child and youth advocate office. We've pushed out core messages, organized around it. I'm happy to say that last year we did receive enabling legislation to form the office. We're still waiting on regulations and a budget, but it was persistency and consistency and a collaboration among different partners to be consistent in that message that got us there. So all of this, to summarize, is that, build your connections and your capital within your organizations. Be a trustworthy person that folks lean into for guidance and support. Navigate resistance with awareness. So know your policy, your procedures, know the risks, and work to understand them and make conscious choices in terms of where that resistance may come. Always work through a collective voice. Try not to do things as an individual. As an individual, you can become an easy target. A collective is way harder to pin down. And finally, persistence. Stick with it. Continue to push. Continue to find opportunities to raise the conscious and political discourse around this. Again, I'm available if anyone has any follow-up to this slide or these concepts, really anything, but we're not going to have a lot of time to discuss this because we want to start to move to wrapping up today's session. But those are there. Those are some ideas. Chew on them if you want to discuss them. I'm more than happy to make myself available. Okay. So we're going to go back into our groups one last time. And what we're going to start to do is think about and consider some of these core principles. I'm just recognizing that it's 10 to 1. So I don't know that we're going to have time for small groups. My apologies. I think maybe I gave you too many breaks. So I'm going to skip this for now because I want to get you out of here on time, and I do want to summarize and wrap up. But I'm going to give you an example of an application of these new code of ethics, and then when you have time, you can go back to your teams or by yourselves and figure out what this might look like. But we all face ethical dilemmas on a daily basis. We're all consistently challenged by the different decisions that we need to make. What we hope the code of ethics and standards of practice allows us to do is offer new considerations on what needs to be considered. So let me give you an example here that we can run with and how the new code of ethics might be applied here. So again, here's the scenario where a social worker is supporting an African Nova Scotian family where intimate partner violence has been disclosed. The survivor of intimate partner violence expresses a desire to keep the family unit intact, citing cultural and community pressures, as well as a lack of trust in the justice system due to historical and systemic racism. The survivor fears that involving authorities could lead to further harm, such as over-policing or the removal of children, which disproportionately affects African Nova Scotian families. Social workers now faced with the dilemma. Within our new code, they are obligated towards cultural humility as well as working towards reparations. Social workers are ethically bound to respect the cultural context and historical injustice faced by African Nova Scotian families as outlined in Guiding Principle 1.5. This includes supporting reparative justice and addressing systemic inequities that have historically harmed African Nova Scotian communities. At the same point in time, the social worker has a duty to protect. Social worker must also prioritize the safety and well-being of the survivor and any children involved, as stated in Guiding Principle 1.9. This may require taking action that can conflict with the survivor's wishes, such as reporting intimate partner violence to authority or involving child and family well-being. Family preservation versus safety, of course, is at the root of this dilemma, and the survivor's desire to preserve the family unit must be balanced against the need to ensure a safe environment for all family members, particularly children, as emphasized in Guiding Principle 4.1. So when we're looking at this dilemma, again, there are multiple different ways that you can look at it and multiple different lenses that need to be brought into the picture. Ultimately, when I look at it, there are a number of core considerations that seem to be at play. And another person might look at it and see other ones. But taking into consideration systemic racism and structural violence, recognizing, and this was part of the call that Robert gave us last Monday at our gender-based violence conference, which is recognizing how systemic racism and structural violence, again, are normalized and have created a lot of harm. And that have eroded trust in institutions that have contributed to the marginalization of African Nova Scotian families. families. There also is a consideration in the need to take a trauma-informed approach, providing choice, opportunities, trying not to create further harm, and recognizing, again, that interventions need not re-traumatize or perpetuate systemic harms. Again, empowerment and self-determination are core principles that need to be respected and upheld, particularly in 1.2, while providing them with the information and resources needed to make informed decisions. So in terms of evolving additional supports or involving other systems, ultimately there is a legal obligation for social workers to report violence that a child might be exposed to, negotiating and creating meaning with those alongside the folks that we're serving can be a way to ensure that empowerment and that self-determination is still there. And what are the community-based solutions? Are exploring, are there culturally relevant and community-driven alternatives? If there's not, how might we create them? To ensure, again, that we're involving trusted community leaders or organizations along the way. Again, there are different considerations that can be made. And along the way, it's always about finding the least worst option. I am sorry that we're not able to further discuss or follow up. I do, before I hand it over to Tyler, just to wrap us up, want to just say a couple of things before we close out for the day. One is that the college does offer ethical consultations. So if ever you're in a bind and you need another pair of ears or other considerations, you can reach out to the college. We have 4 social work staff here that would be able to we never give you answers, so please don't call looking for us to tell you what to do. Usually what we do is give you further considerations or things to think about in terms of the ethical dilemma that you're facing. So please take advantage of that. Also, really important to recognize that the best ethical decision making happens on a team basis. So using each other and leaning into each other to bounce ideas off of. Before I turn it over to Tyler, I like to leave our ethics presentation with this quote because I think it captures the tensions that we face right now well. To be hopeful in bad times is not just food. Oh, my apologies. This is a quote from Howard Zinn, who wrote the People's History of America. What he writes is to be hopeful in bad times is not just foolishly romantic. It is based on the fact that human history is a history not only of cruelty, but also of compassion, sacrifice, courage, and kindness. What we choose to emphasize in this complex history will determine our lives. If we see only the worst, it destroys our capacity to do something. Remember those times and places, and there are so many, where people have behaved magnificently. This gives us the energy to act and at least the possibility of sending this spinning top of a world in a different direction. And if we do act in however small a way, we don't have to wait for some grand utopian future. The future is an infinite succession of presents, and to live now as we think human beings should live in defiance of all that is bad around us is in itself a marvelous victory. I really appreciate everyone giving up their Monday morning to come and join us in these conversations. I do hope that you get some more time to look at the Code of Ethics and start to look at its application. We, of course, will be continuing to do more ethical workshops into the new year and encourage folks to reach out should they have any questions or concerns. Tyler,
Thanks,
you
Alec.
want to wrap us
Yeah,
up?
yeah, it's amazing how fast 4 hours can go. Thanks for sticking around,
Just like
folks. I
that.
know some people had to go, which is totally understandable because we're all busy. Before you leave, though, it'd be really great to hear from folks in the chat just an idea or something that you've heard that you're going to take with you into your practice or anything else that you want to share that's going to help you close out the session for you. I've also put in some links at the top there that there's an evaluation form that you can click on. You can also use this QR code. Love to hear your feedback about the roadshow and this particular training. There's also a link to our YouTube account, which is a great place to check out pre-recorded content. So if you're still trying to complete your mandated hours or required activities for your PD for renewal, that's a great place to do it. There's also our Eventbrite page, which I sent in the chat as well. And also want to point to some of our upcoming activities. It is renewal season, so you have until January 31st. So I encourage you folks to get that done before the holidays if you can. Give yourself a bit of a gift. But we have some other trainings and activities coming up. So later this week, we're going to have a session. Our communities of practice will be our final one for the year. So a place you just meet and chat with other social workers. We have a session on Thursday, anti-pathologizing social work. We have a closed group space for Mi'kmaq and Indigenous folks on Friday. And then next week, we're going to be doing a session on registration and renewal. So if you have questions about registration and renewal, or you want some support, you can come to this. It's part like webinar, part workshop. So come with questions or things that you might want to help get unpacked. And then our final session for the year is on December 10th, and it's a lunch and learn on sensory reels, neurodivergence in the classroom. And this is coming out of social work research out of Cape Breton University. So looking forward to that. You're always welcome to reach out to us directly. If you have any questions, you can send me a message. Lots of our answers can be found on the internet as well on our website. But otherwise, it's been a total pleasure to offer this last roadshow for you folks. And looking forward to seeing you in the new year, which is wild. With that, I'll stop recording.